Hey everyone, it's Kristi. Welcome to yet another hangout because I am doing a hangout marathon in the last few days. But that's okay because it's Happy May Day for those of you who are in Europe. For those of you in America and Canada, I don't think they do. Maybe they do May Day in Canada. But to those of you in America, happy going to work day because you guys don't have Labor Day until September. Anyway, I am here with my good friend, Tim. Demotivator Opinion, someone whose channel I plug all the time. So if you're not subbed already, I don't know what's wrong with you. But we're going to have a chat about a few things, including the future of the Democratic Party and Bernie Sanders and the issues that are like facing progressives in America. But before we started, Tim, off air, you said that there's something else we should start with, which is about the YouTube discourse that either promotes or hinders these kind of self-reflective discussions happening between people. So why don't you go ahead and give your thoughts on whether or not how the YouTube community functions as a place for discourse and conversation.
Well, I guess I could start us off on the Bernie Hillary stuff, which is basically, besides
well, I don't
all
want
the
to talk
other
about,
crap.
yeah, we're gonna, I think we're going to talk about what that we both thought about the future, what ideally we would want for American politics from a progressive stance. I thought that's where we were going to start.
Oh, right. Okay. Yeah, we could do that. Me, you?
Yeah, well, if you want, I mean, I just don't want to relitigate the last election because I think the important issue is going forward. But what is informing how we get to go forward is where we want to end up. And I think if we compare it in terms of, some goals and ideals, you're going to find that we're very much on the same page. So then the question becomes, how do we achieve those things? And if you want me to go first, that's fine. I mean, in terms of, American politics, I would like to see a country where I don't see America not being based off of capitalism. So, you're going to have a capitalist system, but I would like to see it highly regulated with highly redistributive taxes. I would love to see a universal basic income. I would love to see guaranteed health care. I would like to see school funding not based on property taxes and local wealth, but some sort of equitable distribution so that all children have access to a good education that's funded in a stable way, as opposed to kind of like the up and down nature of changing governments based on whether it's Republicans or Democrats in office. I would love to see the end of private prisons, especially like the decriminalization of nonviolent drug possession offenses, and also the expunging of the records of, I would love to see federally legalized, the laws changed about marijuana, so we could empty the prisons of anybody in there for possession and even of selling small amounts, and their records expunged. Because if you get a marijuana conviction, the last time I had to apply for a student loan, if you have a conviction for possession or selling marijuana, that particular one was on the form, you can't get a federally subsidized student loan. So it's another way to exclude people who get arrested for possession. And who is that? Disproportionately Black people, not white people. So there's a lot of issues that I think could be addressed internally. And I'm just going to speak about internal politics and not deal with America's foreign policy, because that's like a whole other issue. Okay.
I think, that can all just be fixed with like humongous bombs, I guess.
Yeah, yes. So, in terms of progressive goals, I think you and I are very much on the same page. And also living in Europe, if I were to vote in European elections, I would vote for more left-leaning parties and candidates than I would in the United States because of the political space available to me. But I see a lot of the benefits of social democracy as practiced in European states. I mean, I'm on holiday in Germany today, and somehow Germany can afford paid parental leave, covering everyone with insurance, having paid sick leave, all these kinds of protections. The German economy isn't failing in any meaningful way. So it's possible to have basically a good safety net, public goods, and capital that is taxed to the point, capitalism that's taxed to the point where it actually funds the economy that's benefiting from the capitalist system.
Yeah.
So in the short term, I would love to get there. So your turn now.
Well, I think I totally agree with everything that you've said. As far as I'm concerned, it's difficult for me to think of many like left-wing or progressive policies that I'm against, except that like ridiculous straw man where you legalize things that are horrible. I'm not keen on, the slippery slope stuff. I'm just keen on like the good progressive stuff that you've said now is the kind of stuff I believe in. But I think that's like part of the reason that this has come up again was because Bernie went on that unity tour, and there was kind of like a lot of division. I don't feel like talking about Bernie Sanders is talking about the previous election, because I definitely feel that there is this kind of split in terms of people who say like Bernie is the much more progressive candidate. Like he comes out and says, I want Medicare for all. I want, this policy and that policy, which is extremely progressive. And then a lot of the people in the establishment are a lot more sort of waffly about it. And so like, you say a lot of like strong progressive policies that I'm really for, but I think that the whole unity tour, created the question of like, is that the kind of thing that the Democratic establishment is fighting for, or are they kind of fighting to get in power on some of that rhetoric, but sort of not really push the envelope? And I think that is where the whole question comes up about, is like Bernie a more progressive side of, I can't say the Democratic Party because he's an independent, but is the Democratic Party as progressive as that? And do they have the formula to turn things around and actually win in America? So I think that's the stuff that was really on my mind. I know that's the kind of stuff that we've been conflicting about more. I think we probably just really agree on the actual policies. So the question in my mind was more, what is the pathway to success? Is it kind of putting forth candidates who are less willing to have openly progressive rhetoric because they have a desire to fit into some kind of democratic machine which allows them to like, I don't know, I'm trying to put my thoughts together on it. Like, I'm not sure what you think on
I think
this area.
Yeah, I think there's, from my perspective, being a long time, I'm not currently a paid member of the Democratic Party, but I've basically been a Democratic Party identifier since I think about when I was 8 years old watching the Reagan Carter debate, and I waved my butt at Ronald Reagan because I didn't like him. Like, even when I was a kid, I didn't like Republicans. Yep. So when it comes to the party, there was some outrage from people upset that the Democratic Unity Tour and Sanders were stumping for a pro-life Democratic mayoral candidate, and I just like people who are like, no, everyone has to be pro-choice. I personally disagree, because as a pragmatist,
Heath Mello was his name, I think.
Yeah. Here's what I know. If Democrats win and Democrats take the majority in a Senate or in the White House or in Congress or a state house, they're a pro-choice party. And so pro-choice legislation will be put forward and anti-choice legislation will not be put forward. So I don't care if you have 10% or 20% of the Democratic Party being represented by pro-life Democrats. As long as we have the majority, it doesn't matter. Like, it's the winning, it's the policies that can get enacted, not the individual beliefs of one person. I might not be happy voting for a pro-life Democrat, but I will vote for a pro-life Democrat over a pro-choice Republican to protect choice because I see the long term. So I don't think those kind of litmus tests are helpful. I don't think saying, hey, you have to conform entirely to our ideology, even as a sort of a cut off your nose to spite your own face position. I would rather lose and have a pro-choice candidate in Montana than win. Like, that's stupid. That is just freaking stupid.
That's interesting, because Joe Ossoff, I don't know how to say his name properly. Ossoff?
Yeah, that was Joe Ossoff.
He was the other person, and Bernie was reluctant to endorse him, and people were angry at Bernie about that. But I don't know enough about Joe Ossoff to have an opinion either way. So do you know anything about that?
Well, what I think the problem in that situation was that Bernie talked before he knew. So he basically said, I don't think he's progressive enough, but I don't really know him. And then later his office walked back and saying, no, actually, we do endorse him. So I think at that point. But
then people were like, he endorsed Heath Mello really quickly, even though that guy has a pro-life history.
Yeah.
But I read an article about Heath Mello, and it said, like, exactly as you just said, that they say it's kind of like a personal belief, but they don't necessarily act on it that often. Like, when push comes to shove, they will allow abortion, I guess. But then that means that they're just pro-life in name only, I suppose, like people like Heath Mello.
Yeah.
You know?
I think
Because
Bernie just needs to be better
yeah,
prepared on those questions. He just needs to know what his position is before he tries to get an answer, because it could help or hurt a Democratic candidate, and he could be flippant about it, and that's a problem. So
well, so I guess I like this. This is kind of why I want to talk to you about it, because like, do you have some kind of annoyance or anger or frustration with Bernie at saying that he's remaining an independent, even though he's still on tour? Because I got the impression that you thought he was saying to the Democratic Party, like, you've got to play my ball game, basically.
yeah, well, that's my perception of what he's been saying since he lost the primary, because he has.
But you know what? I think the problem with that, though, is that there are a lot of people who are I was going to say Bernie bros, but not Bernie bros, but fans of Bernie. So there's a big chunk of people who really like Bernie Sanders. And what are you going to say to them? Are you going to say, like, Bernie's a fake, he's a piece of crap, come support us? Or are people going to try to appeal to them to make them have a less negative view of the Democratic Party? You know?
Well, this is
like appeal to them or tell them to go away?
This is it. I mean, I think that this is, I think Bernie's focus and obsession, I would call it, to use that gendered phrase, with the Democratic Party and the establishment is aiming a lot of energy and division at something that ultimately is not going to be as important as getting candidates who have a commitment to a progressive agenda elected. And so, you know, so there's a couple things that I want to unpack. One is he's not a Democrat. He's really not a Democrat, and he was never, as a Clinton supporter who went through the primary against Obama, who went through the primary against Obama, and then, you know, my candidate lost. And what did I watch Clinton do? I mean, she fought till the end, and I gave that to the Bernie and his supporters too. You know, you fight until it's absolutely impossible, because you owe that to the people who believe in you. But then, what party people do is they swallow their pride, they get behind their nominee, they are supportive, they do the stuff, and they also get their supporters behind the nominee. And Clinton did that. You know, when Clinton was defeated by Obama, I wasn't still resentful at the convention. I wasn't still resentful the day before the election, saying if Clinton won, you know, she would be winning by more than Obama is now. And I felt very much that, you know, she did her part. She adhered to the norms. And when it came to this time around, when Bernie should have done that for her, he didn't, because he's not a party person. And that kind of division then persisted, and the negative comments persisted because he allowed it to. He didn't change the discourse enough. He didn't take enough leadership in creating unity, because he's not a party person. And that really weakened her within her own base, I think, that those divisions that were there in March were still there in October.
I guess that's the question it creates, though, is being a party person the thing that is really needed? Is that the important thing?
When you're running for office and the choice is a Republican, yes. I would rather get imperfect Democrats elected and be in power and work with them and put pressure on them when they hold political power, than to basically say you're a shitty candidate and therefore, you know, I'm not going to try to turn my base out for you, or I'm not really going to stomp out these divisional discourses that are out there, and let it weaken you. Because it's always better to have a flawed person on your side than to have your political opponents running things. And so for me, I guess it is important that he's not a member of the party, because he doesn't have that loyalty. He doesn't have that history of finding unity. What I see him bringing is a lot of critique at internal structures that don't necessarily transmit into policy success. I mean, yeah, you can talk about the horrible influence of money in politics and say, okay, in the DNC, we have to strip ourselves of all its corrupting influence. And then we turn around in an election and we have no money to run against Republicans because we're so pure. And the people that will fund us are really poor. And we're going to ask poor people to fund this so that we can make better policy for them, but we'll never win. So we're just going to waste their money because they don't have enough money to compete. So you don't hate the player, hate the game. We need to, instead of looking at reforming the DNC's financial process and criticizing people for giving speeches to make money, I think we need to talk about campaign finance reform. You know, so get in there, get into power, and then change the game. Don't just hate the players. And I see a lot of player hating. That's me.
But I'm not entirely sure. Like, is Hillary for campaign finance reform? Like, I think Bernie is. Like, it's really, that's the difficult thing, is because Bernie didn't win and he's not in power.
Clinton's never going to run again. Like, her time is over. Like, we're moving forward. So it's people like Cory Booker and maybe Kristi.
Oh no, but it's still a legitimate question, because it's going to be like, do the people that you would want to support in the future, due to some kind of pragmatic, like, idea of pragmatism, you'll support them even if they don't necessarily like believe in those kind of like progressive ideals, but you'll support them because, you know, it's imperative to have someone who's not a Republican or something. But then they get into power and they don't do that kind of thing. Because I feel like a problem with Obama was he said that he was going to have a lot of progressive policies, and when he came in, he was very quote unquote pragmatic, which a lot of the time people just saw as like pre-surrendering. Like, I'm just going to like pre-surrender on the tax deal. I'm just going to pre-surrender on, well, he did fight for Obamacare, so that's something. But you know what I mean?
So I'm looking at Hillary I'm looking at Hillary's positions, and she's on her old page, and she's basically, I'm scrolling down, about Hillary wanted to overturn Citizens United that allowed all the money. She wanted to end secret, unaccountable money in politics, and also to help establish a small donor matching system for presidential and congressional elections to give smaller donors rather than larger ones a greater influence. So, yeah, I mean, I think, you know, again, it's about like, don't hate the player, hate the game.
So that's not full reform, but it's kind of like half reform.
Well, I mean, it's, you know, well, I don't know if, you know, it was like one website. I'm sure she's got an entire policy paper, unlike Trump, on campaign finance reform that you can go. But it's not the case that somehow, and this is the other thing, I think Bernie creates a really bad impression of establishment. You want to call them Democrats. There are a lot of, you know, I've been told by people who are Sanders supporters that I'm not that concerned about money in politics, and I'm not concerned about reforming the Democratic Party. That's bullshit. Like, just because that's his narrative about the establishment, that doesn't mean it's accurate. I think there's a pragmatism that a lot of people have, and that pragmatism is being maligned as being unethical, when really it's a view that the way to change the system is not to do it by unilateral disarmament, it's to do it by changing the system, like with Citizens United, with other ways of you know, small donor matching funds, or even, you know, forcing broadcasters as part of their public service to offer a certain amount of their time to local elections and state elections in order to bring down the cost. And this is it. I mean, we have to look at why there is money in politics so much in the United States. And one of it is the Citizens United and
capitalism. Damn it.
It's because, you know, most campaigns are run in on the airwaves, radio, television, increasingly online. And that is incredibly expensive. It's like, you know, when I was working in politics, a 30-second ad during a Thursday night Packer game in a local TV station was $6,000. And that was like in the 90s. So, you know, it's $6,000. It puts running for office out of reach. And so if we can find a way to control the cost of communicating with voters, or cap it, or find, you know, other ways of bringing down the costs, then you don't need as much money to communicate with your voters. And so that's the real problem. It's not about like good Democrats and bad Democrats. It's about the cost of running campaigns. Now, like in the UK, for instance, their elections are 3 weeks, or my study is 3 weeks long. Their campaigns are 5 weeks long, and they still complain about how long their campaigns are, which is hilarious. Each constituency, by party, has a cap of how much they can spend. I don't know what it currently is, but let's just say it's like £250,000 or something for a constituency. And that includes your staff and your flyers. The TV advertising on BBC and all that is done by slots. They have designated slots for a party political broadcast from the Conservative Party. And that allows, that reduces the amount of money campaigns and parties need. And so then you have less of a hold over your elected representatives. That's the real core issue that needs to be addressed in American politics.
So in a like publicly financed system, all of that stuff would have to be covered for, like paying staff, like doing advertising, all of the organizational aspects. And that's one of the things I'm not really sure about on that is like, how do they divvy out who is deserving of that money? I guess I'd have to look into that more. But, if it was completely publicly financed.
Yeah, and but the problem, of course, is that there's a real public resistance to the idea, even though it has a good governance element to it. That instead of being beholden to corporate donations, you use public money to run your campaign. There are a lot of people who feel like that's a waste of money. So that's the other obstacle. Basically, you're saying, oh, you're voting taxpayer funding into your own elections, and that's not.
Well, those people would have to appeal for those funds, right? They'd have to find a way of actually receiving those funds. So they would have to do all kinds of appeals to the public finances to say, like, we are a worthy political cause or political party to give these public funds to.
Yeah, of course, the weird thing is, in the UK, you don't have a primary system. You have candidate selection, and that's an internal party process. And sometimes your candidate doesn't even live in your constituency. They're parachuted in from somewhere else. So the money goes to the party, and the parties decide how to distribute it. Whereas in the US, again, the Democratic Party doesn't have that much power. The Republican Party, they're just sort of umbrella organizations that raise money for candidates. But it's not as if the Democratic Party platform matters to any Democrat. No one's ever going to be held accountable for voting against the platform. So it becomes harder to justify individuals, let's say in a primary, who deserves and doesn't deserve money in a 3-way primary or a 17-way primary.
Yeah, but putting aside how it's like actually done or how we'd want it to be done, don't you reckon the perception that all of these politicians are bought off and just taking money from large corporations and weapons contractors and pharmaceuticals and all that kind of thing in Wall Street, that's quite a powerful perception, don't you think? Like, people have a visceral hatred of that, I guess.
Right, but they have it on
anger against it.
Both sides. I think they consider it a problem for both sides of the aisle.
Certainly, but I think like the Bernie wing that I guess you say are like sort of sowing division, a lot of that is anger at that, like this perception of corruption. And whether or not, like, you think whether or not they are corrupt or whether they in the future want to have a less corrupt system, I think the perception that is there is definitely driving a lot of these divisions. Like, there's people on the progressive side, or whatever you want to call them, a lot of them just think that the Democratic Party is just a corrupt, stinking cesspool, basically.
Well, here's and I'm sure people do. The problem is the average voter doesn't care. They care about whether or not they're going to be able to afford their health care, whether or not they're going to be able to take their family on vacation, whether their garbage is getting picked up.
But I'm not sure about that, because
no, go look at
they
the polls.
voted Trump in.
No, go look. Well, no, they did. If you look at it, he didn't win the popular vote. He also got in with the help of a lot of voter suppression, and so it comes down to, it's not, voting for Trump wasn't necessarily you can't infer from millions of people a certain intention. This is a problem. A lot of politicians like to claim a mandate after they win, and it's just not the case, because people vote for a lot of different reasons. But if you look
especially with Trump,
if you look at people's biggest concerns, like what are the most important issues facing you today, it's things like stagnant wages, it's a fear of terrorism, it's people don't really. I know that people who support Bernie care about the perception of corruption in the DNC, but that's because that's like their bubble and that's their value system. But if you go outside and talk to a trucker at a truck stop, or they're going to, of course, be negative about politicians, but they're not most concerned about reforming the ethics of the DNC over and above making sure Obamacare doesn't collapse.
But I think that's a very big issue, though, because a lot of the people who voted for Trump would say, yeah, I want better wages, I want a better life, I want better healthcare, I want more jobs, I want things to be more affordable. But they get duped by these people who are not going to provide any of those things and have no intention of doing anything that's going to fucking help them at all. But they go to the polls and they're like, Trump or whomever, they gave me all of this rhetoric, good enough for me, and they vote in this like terrible person, So I think that's quite a problem. And I think the thing with Bernie is, I mean, at least people who support him perceive that he's genuine, that he actually believes the things that he's saying. Like, it's very hard to test that, because It's doubtful he's ever going to become president or anything like that. But, you know, he's got a long career of doing what he says he's going to do. And I think that is... Whoa, shit, what happened?
Oh, sorry, I
doing
put on my
screen
screen share.
Sorry.
Yeah, because I just looked this up, and it's the biggest problem cited by Americans, and this is in February of 2017.
Right,
So we have,
but,
of course...
like, do you see what I'm saying? Like, even though they have those dreams and those desires, it's not going to prevent them from voting in somebody who just does them lip service, but is not necessarily that way. And I think that's why people like Bernie. They're like, he seems honest or whatever. You know?
Well, Bernie's never had to really compromise, right? He's been in the Senate where he can take really symbolic votes without being punished by his constituents. And I think if he actually had to govern, let's say with a Republican Congress, it would be a very different story, because he would then, because here's the other thing, you know, by the way, so here's just, I'll go back to.
All right, but I think that would be the case with literally anybody has, like, because I remember when Obama came in,
exactly.
And he was like, you know, he was kind of like, this job has changed my perception of what I could do. And Trump is exactly the same. He's like, this is weird. And I think literally anybody, Bernie, Hillary, anyone who gets into the job of president is surprised at what you are capable of achieving in the role.
So can we just go over what the American people say they care about? So in February, this was right after the inauguration, obviously. You've got dissatisfaction with government, unifying the country, and immigration, also civil rights, race relations. In January, before marches and stuff, you had the budget, the economy in general, unemployment, dissatisfaction with government, and then they go back to 2009. But coming back to the issue of, so as a Hillary supporter in 2008, I was told she's centrist, she's too corporate, she's too this. What we need is a Barack Obama, because he's going to be the big change, right? He's the progressive voice. He's the future. He's going to reform things, right? And so then their candidate won. And I swallowed my pride and I swallowed my aspirations. I'm like, okay, we're going to get behind our nominee. And I got behind my nominee. Then I got behind my president. And you know what? The people who were most vociferous about how evil Clinton was and how great Obama was back in 2008 now all hate Obama. And I'm defending the president, and they're saying, no, it's Sanders. This time it's Sanders who's a really pure one. I'm just like, screw you. You said this about Obama. Now you've turned your back on him. So I've listened to you, gotten behind your candidate, and then you walked away from your candidate.
Well,
why should I believe you again?
There's definitely a difference between Sanders, I don't know, and Obama, which is that Sanders has a much longer record.
But it doesn't matter. The point was that they were making the exact same arguments about why Obama was better than Clinton because he was purer and not as corporate and this, that, and the other, and as people were making about Sanders. So I've heard this song and dance before, and I know that you get behind it, and then the presidency changes you.
It would be a much more of a switch if Sanders suddenly went against all his values than if Obama did, because Obama didn't have as established values to go against. It was quite easy for him to create this picture in the 2008 election, because he did have some good stuff, being a community organizer and being just a generally good dude, but he didn't have 30 whatever years of basically fighting for social justice causes like Bernie Sanders has got. He would have to be quite but I agree with you.
In real time.
No, but I agree with you that nobody is ever ready for the presidency. So I totally agree with you that if Bernie had gotten in there, he'd be like, whoa. Because all of them are like that, so. Yeah,
exactly. And the other thing too is, again, I keep coming back to it. He's not a member of the party. And that's important in the same way that, okay, let's say that Barron came over and started lecturing New Zealand on how it should organize its government. He moves over there saying, all of this is rubbish. What you need to do is this, that, and the other thing. And a whole bunch of people came over and were like, yeah, you need to totally rearrange your system. You need to do this, you need to do that. And then there's all this pressure to change the system. And they're like, okay, so you're going to become a citizen of New Zealand? He's like, no, I'm still going to be Australian, but you guys should do what I say anyway. I mean, that's kind of how I feel about Bernie and the independents. And I know that there are people inside the party who agree with Bernie, but I think, honestly, Bernie is getting in the way of the kinds of things he's saying. If it was Elizabeth Warren, if it was anyone else, because there are a lot of Clinton people who are still really mad, who feel stabbed in the back, who feel like instead of helping her, he undermined her. And as long as his face is attached to those issues, there's going to be a base of the Democratic Party that's just going to reject it because of who is saying it and their history with him.
But
So
don't you
Bernie
feel
needs
like,
to get
I
out of the
mean,
way.
wouldn't it kind of depend on what Bering was saying? If he came over to my country and he was like, you know, maybe you shouldn't do, and then it's just like something that's bad. Maybe you shouldn't do that. Be like, oh, okay, but that's probably a good idea because it's a bad thing to do.
But it's
You
not only
know, but
that,
if he
you're
came over and
corrupt
was
and
just,
bad for doing it. He's not just saying it's bad. He's saying you're bad. Your system is bad. The way you do things is bad. I mean, Bernie's critique was systemic and without real, exceptions for certain individuals. It was rather blanket, aimed
but I mean,
at a concept like the establishment.
I'm quite open to like critiques of my country. If there's something that we're doing bad, then I'm like, okay, well, that's pretty bad. We shouldn't like, I don't know, take away single mothers' health care. Like, I don't fucking know. I don't know what it would be, but
But you can understand why it's a little bit annoying to be lectured by someone who's not a member of your party and has no interest in joining it. So no matter how much we conform, it's not like he's ever going to say, okay, now I'll join your party. Because that's not his brand. So we're basically trying to conform ourselves to an old white man's idea of what we should do and be. And then he's not even going to, make any effort to be inclusive and be part of the change that he wants to see happen. It's, as a party person, again, I find it very off-putting and ärgerlich, irritating, as you say the German word, and so for me, I think, to be honest, at this point, it's the messenger more than the message that is the problem.
Yeah. But I think the issue that really comes up for me is when I see Bernie criticizing the Democratic Party and then people saying he's not a Democrat, the first thing that comes to my mind is, what's so great about being a Democrat? Like, to be honest, because I think that the most important thing to me, well, at least in terms of my values, is to be as progressive as possible. And if a party is not being as progressive as I want it to be, I don't know if I'd want to be part of that party. I would just be like, this party is not as progressive as I want to be. And I know that it's like probably like pie in the sky, kind of like, idealistic thinking. But I mean, those are my particular values. So I would want to try to push them in that direction. But I guess, like, are you kind of saying that he should join the Democratic Party in order to make it more progressive instead of criticizing it from the outside?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
Join the party. Just, actually come inside and be part of the solution rather than trying to have it both ways, which is enforce a change that he wants to see without actually tainting himself with any partisan labels. And so it's
I actually don't know why he doesn't call himself a Democrat when I think about it. Like, what is the reason? I'm not sure what his reasoning is.
Yeah, I mean, if you want to see a change, just join, just become part of the solution. And that's one of a lot of my objections would go away if he would just walk the walk and pretend like he cares about getting Democratic candidates elected at every level, and he's willing to do the work to not only just come in and dictate how we should do things, but also do the work in helping to raise money. For instance, give the Democratic Party his email list, or do fundraisers on behalf of other candidates with small dollar independent funding, so we don't have to take corporate money. Where's that kind of support coming from Bernie Sanders? Because at the end of the day, you can have all the principles you want, but if you don't have the money to communicate a message, you are going to lose. And I am tired of losing. I am tired of Republican policies. I am tired of Republican bullshit and corporate tax slashing and making the poor suffer and treating this country like it's taxpayer funded private prisons and military industrial complex. That's the only thing that are important. And we're never going to do that unless we can win. And we can't win unless we can get out a message. And we can't get out a message in this current political system without money. It all comes back to money at this point. Money first, then power, then reform. Money, power, reform. That's what we need to do.
Yeah. Well, I guess like just Bernie doesn't believe in the Democratic Party, I suppose.
Yeah, which means that's his opinion, but I don't have to take it seriously.
Right. No, but that's the issue, is that there's a lot of people who do take Bernie's message seriously. There's a lot of people who do agree with Bernie and think that he has the right path of things. But I guess it is difficult because he's also not big upping the Democratic Party, and he's not, so there is that division. But I do often feel like the people in Bernie's camp, they do want the Democratic Party to be more open about their support for like universal healthcare and that kind of thing. And You know, there was a
Yeah.
progressive caucus. Is that still around? I don't know if it is.
Well, this also comes to what I would call a calibration of the constituency or the district, to be in American language, the congressional district you live in. I mean, if you're running in Montana, you're never going to get elected on certain kinds of issues. You're just, if you try to run on universal basic income in some of these really Republican places, you are never going to get elected. So the question becomes, can we as a party tolerate people who hold opinions we disagree with in our own party if they're the best for that, if that is the closest progressive position we can have for that constituency or that district? And I'm saying yes. I think I'm willing to elect pro-life Democrats. I'm willing to elect Democrats that want to do concealed carry legislation if it means we get a majority, because I know then the policies won't matter. And if the Republicans are running it, to be honest, those votes are going to be there anyway, and the Democrat won't probably have that much influence on, you know, swinging the vote one way or the other. But I feel like Bernie's people are saying we have to adhere to an East Coast, West Coast liberal ideology litmus test across the country. And it's better to lose and be pure than it is to compromise your principles and win. And that's the exact opposite position I have.
Right. Then, well, I mean, because Hillary didn't win in terms of her being the president now, even though she like won the popular vote. Do you think the problem there was a personal thing? Like people have a personal issue with Hillary? Because if she was for all of these progressive ideals, then it wasn't necessarily a problem with her views. You know, it wasn't a problem.
I think it was.
You know what she
I
wants.
think the problem was that she was running against 4 men, and they were running against 1 woman. She was running against Putin and Sanders and Trump and James Comey of the FBI, who released that report, 10 days before the election, without also revealing that Donald Trump was under FBI investigation for collaborating with Russia.
Yeah, but you know, I mean, like at least for me, if you replaced Hillary Clinton with Elizabeth Warren, I would have been like crazy in support. I would have been like, yes.
Well, here's the question: you know? If it was Elizabeth Warren with Clinton's policies.
Well, I mean, knowing what I know about Elizabeth Warren, that's very difficult for me to imagine. But yeah, I mean, I don't know, because she would be Elizabeth Warren. Like Elizabeth Warren wouldn't be Elizabeth Warren if she had Hillary Clinton's policies. Like she'd be
I think, you know, there was 2
else.
years. You know, Clinton was her approval ratings were in the 60s before the Republicans spent 2 years on the emails and Benghazi committee investigations that were designed to be dragged out until the election. And actually, Jason Chaffetz said on the eve of the election that they had 2 years more worth of hearings to do after Election Day on Clinton's emails. Right. So this was a sustained taxpayer-funded, ongoing character assassination on top of what Putin was doing, because he didn't want to see her elected, and Donald Trump was echoing it, and Bernie Sanders wasn't trying to counter it. He wasn't coming, robustly to her defense. So I just feel like, she basically had a really sustained and almost unanswerable amount of negative discourse aimed at her. And that was very difficult for her to counter and get air in the media to cover her issues.
But I mean, during the whole, Obama election, she was struggling from the same questions of like, is she genuine? Is she a woman of the people? Is she speaking her mind? Is she real? Is she fake? You know, the whole same thing was going on.
But that was also Trump. That was how Trump distinguished himself from every other of his 16 opponents in the primary. I mean, politicians are always called fake, and so I don't know that it's any worse for her. And I don't want to see, she was blamed for her husband's policies on, for passing NAFTA. She was blamed for things that her husband negotiated with the Republicans in the 90s. And it was basically people wanted to exchange Bill and Hillary as if she wasn't herself. She was just a clone of her husband. And I always felt that was really, I understand why people did it, but I also felt like it was unfair because they were trying to basically pin her with things that she didn't have the political power at the time to do. Now, fine, make her accountable for her votes in the Senate, and that sort of thing, and her time as Secretary of State. That's fine. She did those things, but there was so much of a conflation of Bill and Hillary in order to bring her down and to pin her with all of his worst things that people didn't like about him in a way that Bernie didn't have to do, in that way.
Well, I mean, they'd even call them Billary or something. Or,
yeah.
I don't know how you do the other one. It would be like...
And that's actually not uncommon.
Hillary.
A lot of women who run for office because of the barriers women face end up, being the daughter of a politician, right? So there's a family lineage, or there's a marriage link, or she's a widow. And that's especially early on, that was women's entry into politics, was their relationships through men. And that's like Marie Le Pen is another example of that. And I'm not saying that that's always the case, but that's a very common route that women end up taking that men don't. You don't see a lot of men getting in politics because their wives were famous politicians. So, I mean, she was almost always going to be tainted with that link to the past because of her, that she had her kids while Bill ran for office, and then she supported him as president, and she supported him as first lady. But when it came to be her turn, she couldn't be an independent person running just on her own merit. She was always so
right. Yeah, well, there was also that perception of it's her turn. Like, people were like, oh, she feels like she's entitled to be president or something. Like, I saw that around a lot, like people saying that a lot. She's just like, give me the presidency. And then I think a lot of people, I think there was this resentment, like, we don't want her to be the president because she feels like she should be, to such an extent, like, oh, I can just walk in and get it. But that doesn't really make sense because, George W. Bush became president and he was a disaster. So, and he could just be like, oh, give me the presidency. And like,
and from my point of view, she had done all the things to merit it's her opportunity. It's her turn to be the nominee because she had run in the primary. She lost. She was gracious. She got behind Obama. Not only did she get behind Obama, she decided to serve in his cabinet. Right. And she served her country. She performed well. I mean, yes, there were things that happened on her watch, but there are things that happened on everybody's watch. She demonstrated her competency. And she also, did the work leading up to it to try to reach out to, she performed fantastically in the primaries with the African American community and the Hispanic community, places that we need that kind of connection and outreach as we face demographic changes going forward. She had done all the things to deserve to be the nominee in terms of proving her worth as a candidate, proving her loyalty, all that kind of stuff. And then Sanders just sort of wanders in, not a member of the party, never having made political sacrifices for the party or any of its candidates, saying, hey, you know what, this all sucks, vote for me, and I'm going to change it. And yeah, there was that kind of resentment of, here's a woman who's done all the things that other men have done to be successful. And yet, when she does everything that has provided success in the past for men, she's still being denied her legitimacy of what she's done to get her there. So, I mean, there's also some gender politics too going on there. There's a reason why, a lot of women got upset.
But I was actually just thinking about that. Like, I have had similar complaints about Hillary Clinton in terms of like the genuineness or her thinking she could just like show up and take the presidency and that kind of thing. But the interesting thing is there's no other female candidate to compare that to. So if Elizabeth Warren or another female candidate had come in, Lord knows what they would have said about them. I don't know, because there's nothing to compare it to. So like, for all I know, if Elizabeth Warren had tried to do the same thing, it would have been as bad or worse, because and with Obama, like, in the early years, they were just going on and on about how he's actually Kenyan and he doesn't have a birth certificate and he's Satan. Obama is the worst person on earth. He's a fucking.
But that wasn't coming from
communist.
Inside the party. That was coming from outside the party. Whereas the attacks against Hillary were coming from people who were claiming, like the Sanders supporters who were joining the Democratic Party just to vote for him.
Right. Well, I do think that Sanders supporters were. They're more, I mean, it's not like the right word, I guess, but like more pure than fucking, Obama supporters were against Hillary Clinton. Like, they were a bit more accepting after she was defeated or whatever. But I think Sanders supporters, and I do think that is somewhat of a reflection of the belief that Bernie Sanders is more progressive and more fighting for like policies that they say the Democrats should believe in, like, you know,
See,
public
I think
financing and universal health care and, you know, much stronger regulations and like getting rid of Wall Street and, you know, all that kind of shit, you know?
yeah, I mean, they're very bourgeois concerns, right? This is how I see Bernie Sanders supporters, to be honest. They're very bourgeois. They're bourgeois in that, you know, because they can afford to be concerned about Wall Street reform, because they can be swayed by a policy of free tuition. Well, you know, if your public schools are falling apart, Wall Street reform is not that important to you. You know, if you've got a problem with guns in your community, getting your kid to college is like, you just want to make sure they live to see the end of high school. And this is why Bernie did so poorly with the non-white primary, where it was not dominated by white people. And I understand those concerns about, you know, we need campaign finance reform and we need Wall Street reform, but there are more basic on a sort of Maslow's hierarchy of needs. I see that, you know, first it's like food and shelter and education and clean water that you can drink out of your pipes. But what I heard mostly, you know, in terms of the media coverage was Sanders focusing on free university tuition and Wall Street reform and other things that were played really well if you had a college education and, you know, you lived in an urban area. But what are you offering for rural communities? What are you offering to those communities, the African American community, the Hispanic community? You know, and he, of course, wants to sort of use class politics as a proxy for all of those concerns, whereas I and many people in the Democratic Party see identity and intersectionality, you know, on those bases of identity, class, race, ethnicity, disability, as fundamental. You know, the whole thing about you know, about with Sargon, you know, and saying that no, it wasn't Sargon. It was about abortion. Oh, this is what you know, I can understand where they're coming from, even if I disagree. But there was the critique of, you know, people who said Bernie, who criticized Bernie for supporting an anti-choice candidate, said, you know, abortion is an economic issue. And they have a point. Most women do have abortions for economic reasons, in that they can't afford to have another baby. It's not a convenience decision. It's a money decision. And by kind of poo-pooing abortion like that is not being important, it feeds into that issue that he doesn't understand identity politics, and that he thinks that somehow a Marxist critique of capitalism will somehow address things that are based on social constructions like racist institutions and sexist workplaces that women like at Fox News. So I think that there's a kind of a tone deafness in
I definitely, you kind of lose me when you say a Marxist critique. Like, what do you mean? He's not a Marxist, right? like
Well, insofar as
Marxist critique.
No, I think, you know, look, Marx is the person who developed the theory of class, right? That we know today in terms of like, so that's what I mean by Marx.
So using it like okay, I'm so used to things
like a theoretical
being used as I'm so used to things being used as buzzwords that it's really confusing.
Yeah.
I'm like, oh, you're saying like actual Marx, not like internet Marx.
Like he has an understanding. Yes, like everything comes from economics. You know, it's the
like
economy.
He actually understands Marx. Like, oh, okay.
Yeah, someone who understands Marx. Yeah.
Well, okay.
And that's why I use the term bourgeois. I mean, I was very deliberate, and I think, you know, when he constructed part of his discourse, it very much appeals to a middle-class bourgeois, white, educated voter, which is why he did really well with that demographic, or even not like college educated, but in some other places, like high school education as well, because it speaks more to their concerns. But he doesn't have that link with minority communities.
Well, okay. Well, that's another subject then, is the whole Bernie Bros thing. And I mainly talk about that in terms of just the phrase Bernie Bros, because it does remind me a little bit of Hillbots. I saw that around a lot because, you know, I follow the Young Turks, or TYT, and
I stopped. I found them too annoying for obvious reasons.
Like, one of their people, who he's called John Graziano, I think. I follow him on Twitter, and everything he says is just Hillbots this, Hillbots that, fucking Hillbots. And then anyone he's like responding to, he's like, who supports Hillary, he's like, another fucking Hillbot right here, saying stupid Hillbot shit. And while I agree that sometimes it's a little hard to get along with some Hillary supporters, I don't necessarily agree with just putting out those kind of blanket labels, because I'm sure that you could say, like, there are people who are specifically Bernie Bros, people who you could say are Bernie Bros. But those kind of phrases, I think, get abused eventually. And I think bots would definitely get abused, because I'm sure he could say, I can identify a hillbot. This is what a hillbot is. But then eventually, anyone who supports Hillary is going to be a hillbot to you. And anyone who supports Bernie is going to be a Bernie bro, But I don't know if it's just like a specific type of Bernie supporter, like a white, aggressive, middle-class person. But then again,
in this case,
I don't know what a hillbot is. So
yeah, well, I don't know what a hillbot is either. I guess it's somebody who repeats talking points, like I was saying about So from my side, you can be a man or a woman and whatever. I've met Bernie bros from all walks of life and all genders.
You can be a woman, Bernie bro.
Anyone can be. It's actually like man, like in the mankind. Bernie bro is a universal term, it's not a gender term. But I think it was, I would use it when I would, try to make an argument for Clinton. I'm just being, I would get back, you're voting for you're voting because she has a vagina. And at that point, it's just like with any other conversation. You're like, look, you're obviously not interested. You've got a stereotype of me in your head that is not based on the issues, it's based on the convenience, and you're trying to dismiss me by equating the fact that I'm a woman who supports a woman. It has to be because she has a vagina, not because I've actually thought about it and I prefer her for pragmatic reasons. So that's part of it that gave the kind of the impression. But then also just like the aggressiveness of, and I think there is like, Saint Bernie, like if you speak against Saint Bernie, suddenly, like there's a level of vitriol that occasionally you get that just seems disproportionate. Like that escalated quickly, and it just seems really disproportionate to the criticisms that you're giving.
That's why when you said that you didn't mind the Heath Mello thing about like him supporting a pro-life candidate, I was surprised because I had changed my mind on that and decided that that was a bad thing for Bernie to do. So it's like you're kind of like defending Bernie on something, and I'm kind of like criticizing him on it. So that's weird. Like it's supposed to be the other way around. I'm the one who's supposed to be like defending anything he does.
No, I mean, if he can go to certain parts of Montana, urban areas where there is a strong progressive tradition, and be like, this is the most progressive candidate we can get elected, and this person is going to be a step in, toward universal basic income. This person is going to help us get back the majority. That's what I want to see him doing. Right. And so if that means, electing pro-NRA places, candidates in the South and anti-choice candidates in deep red fundamentalist places, hey, I'll take the W. Just give me the W. And I would love if he did that, but that's kind of not what he's doing. There's always still that tinge of, I'm not really here. The Democratic Party is corrupt. Yeah, vote for this candidate, but they're not progressive enough. Yeah, so, support this person. But, what we really want to do is change this party because it sucks. And it's just that kind of, backhanded compliments. My cheeks are getting sore from all the backhanded compliments Bernie's been giving my party.
Yeah. Well, I definitely don't think he believes in the party, to be honest. Like, it's not something that he likes. Yeah.
And it's just like a bandwagon fan, like, it's like the angst or anger that people have who just like, like you've been a diehard Cubs fan your whole life or a Red Sox fan. And then in the last 6 weeks of this season, when they're about to hit the World Series, someone comes along and goes, yay, I'm a Red Sox fan too. And you're like, no, you're not, because you've not suffered. You've not been in the ups and downs and the crying and the tears. And you've not, and this is it. I put in hours of my life working for Democratic candidates. I was there the night that they took Black Florida from Al Gore. And instead of having a Gore presidency, we ended up with Bush and an invasion of Iraq. And, that kind of stuff that I feel gets dismissed when someone just goes, oh, the party's corrupt and these kinds of bad things. So.
Oh, I remember what I was going to say. When you said that the person was just like, you're voting for her because she has a vagina, I agree that that's very insulting, but I also think that Hillary didn't help, because I remember specifically when she was asked by John King or some CNN person, they were like, what is it about your presidency that's going to be new or different? And she's like, I think it's obvious. And everyone was like, ah, ha, 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 because she's a woman or whatever.
Right.
And but the reason that was jarring was not because of that answer, but because Obama never, I can't remember him ever saying, because like, I'm black. I can't remember him saying it.
He did give a speech. He did give a speech about, I think there was something, it might have been to do with like the guy, the preacher he was tied in with. But during the primaries, he did kind of address the race issue. But you're right. He was a black man who ran as a non-black man. in order to be
Right.
non-threatening to racist whites in not just rural areas, but in across the country. And it worked.
But I
Right?
think
So
that's
what
the
we've learned is,
with a
if
general
you point out
election.
the obvious, yeah, if you
With a
point out the
general election,
obvious,
if you offend people, even like, you know, we have the luxury of offending stupid people who think, you know, dear white people is like
yeah,
extremely
which is a
offensive
funny show. I think it's
I can go on
hilarious.
Twitter. I can go on Twitter and say, you fucking stupid whitey snowflake dumbasses, get the fuck over it. It's a good show. But on like a presidential general level, you can't like people are so sensitive, you can't offend them about their skin color or gender or whatever, you know. And I feel like a lot of like men or people or whoever the fuck they were like, oh, Hillary Clinton with her identity politics, look at me, I have a vagina. And I feel like that's where a lot of that came from what I
Right,
can see.
but the thing is, I mean, that accusation was being hurled at her long before she made that statement. And two, I mean, the implication there is, in order to be elected, what women have to do is run as non-women, and what non-whites have to do is run as non-whites. So basically, you know, what that's implying, and I'm not saying that, you know, I'm not putting this on you, I'm saying it's about the system, that anyone who is different from a white male can't make a note of that as what contribution, how that's new, how that would make an advance in sort of breaking glass ceilings, because that then risks the backlash of white people or males noticing.
Yeah.
You have to run as sort of a manly woman or as a white guy, you know.
Definitely.
Sort of, you know.
Yeah.
And
No,
that says more about the system than it does about the candidates.
No, yeah, that's all I'm saying. I'm saying, like, I think that, like, okay, I was going to say that I wasn't offended by that answer, but I think I kind of was, just in terms of, like, it being cynical. Just being like, because you expect the candidate to just say, like, policies and stuff, but I feel like sometimes I care too much about, like, their policy rather than their identity, you know? Like, Bernie Sanders being an old white dude is lame. I don't like it. It kind of sucks. I wish he was more interesting. I wish he was something else, because an old white dude, that's no good. But I agree with his policies, and he, like, to me, he seems like the most progressive.
Yeah, it's not that it's not good. It's just so overdone. It's so been there, done that.
Right.
There's just so many of those guys already. Kind of. I don't want to. Yeah, I just want to correct. I don't think you actually think it's bad that he's white. It's just it's so common and been done.
I don't even care at this point about saying that being white's bad. Whatever. You know, people on Twitter, say what you want. Just do your thing.
Go nuts.
But like, that's why that answer from Hillary was like disappointing, because it was kind of like, damn it, what about the like you're supposed to say some kind of policy, or like something that you're going to do as president, you know? But I feel like that's not really the way people operate. They operate more on kind of like identity, I guess. You know, they don't really think about the policy kind of shit, because like, I'm always trying to say that, I'm like, when I think about what makes people left wing, the first thing I think of is policies, but they often think of identity and culture war stuff. Like, are they willing to call people snowflakes and like,
well, there are
justice warriors or something? That I don't know what that's got to do with being left. You know?
Well, there is a certain point to be made that if you look at the studies, when women enter like parliaments or other legislative bodies, the kinds of bills they sponsor are different. There is more of an emphasis on family law and women's issues and children's issues that can be traced back to women politicians than male politicians. And so her being a woman might have actually changed, you know, because of the perspective she was bringing to the White House, the emphasis or the highlights of, you know, what gets put forward in terms of a policy agenda because of her lived experience. So I know that, you know, people want to be dismissive of the role of identity, but, you know, it was important that Barack Obama was a biracial man because he had the most diverse cabinet in history. And that was a direct consequence of his lived experience and knowing more people, you know, having more contacts of really qualified people that he could draw on. And we don't know what the consequences of having a woman president would be on things like, you know, policies in the U.S. or the number of women in cabinet positions and advancement of women's issues as part of overall policy in a way that it hadn't been before. So I know she got a lot of shtick for that because it feeds into the whole you're voting for, you know, her because she has a vagina narrative. But I don't think it was I think what her answer represented is it's not that my presidency is only going to be different because I'm a woman, but the fact that I am a woman is going to be historic. And people wanted to, I think, deny her that legitimacy in that way, because just like with, rallying around African-American voters or Black voters, people were saying, oh, you're just voting based on race. And that accusation is never made against male candidates or against white candidates. That knife is only wielded in one direction, and that's against people who aren't white males. If you try to distinguish yourself, you're going to be punished for it, which means that you have to basically try to be indistinguishable from a white male, which is annoying.
Yeah.
Because you're never going to be a white male. Hillary is never going to be a white male. She's, she can be white, but she can't be a man. So.
Well, I think the issue is that when you combine the word identity with politics, that's when it becomes extremely toxic. Identity politics is like one of the most negative phrases, at least in terms of how people talk about it, that I can think of.
Yeah, but everyone plays identity politics. It's just when Fox News plays identity politics, because it's mostly older white men, they don't actually see themselves as having an identity. They just see themselves as the base, and everyone else who claims something different from them, they are doing identity politics. But
well, that's exactly what I think the problem is, because I think in a general election, you are appealing to like more people than you can imagine. It's just you're appealing to everybody, and that is difficult. It's really hard to appeal to everybody. Whereas if you're Fox News, you can fucking pander all day long to just fucking old white people sitting on their couch who don't like brown people. They don't like anybody else. They don't like, people who aren't heterosexual. But if you're in a general election, I mean, I think that is the challenge.
Yeah, but you can't. Yeah. You can't connect policies to the lived experience of a woman, of an African-American woman in an urban area trying to raise, with a 2-income household barely making ends meet, by papering over the racial barriers she and her kids face, and the sexist barriers or the gendered nature of her work, that maybe she is a waitress and she's got to put up with people making comments about her body in her workplace in order to get better tips. You can't. This is why when Bernie says and criticizes identity politics, I think a lot of people get their hackles up, because it basically says, it seems to be saying, what we need to do is we need to talk about everything in the frame of a white male. That's the base. And everything else is identity politics and bad. And that's what I hear when he criticizes identity politics. Saying, unless we have to appeal to white male rural voters, and we need to make our party attractive to those people at the expense of you. And that's a problem I think we face.
I think I see it more as like they need a policy for every type of person. So they need basically like a smorgasbord of policies. Like there needs to be something that every group can find and like.
And that's why I agree. And that's why we need to elect pro or anti-choice. I keep saying pro-life to be like politically correct, but I don't have to here because it's my channel. We elect anti-choice Democrats and pro-gun Democrats, because those are the most progressive people we can get for those constituencies. And that's what or those districts. And I agree with that. I think that's exactly the direction the party needs to go in, is to tailor our message in order to have messages that connect to people where they live. Tip O'Neill's all politics is local, rather than saying, and I don't even mind, like, Nancy Pelosi is going to get primaried by a Bernie supporter. That's fine. In California, who freaking cares? Go for it. But if you're if there's a small contingency of Sanders supporters, or let's say more people who agree with his point of view, who put up sacrificial candidates into races that we could at least put into play, then that hurts us long term. And that's my concern for the party.
Okay. So kind of like an organizational concern. But so the next step, I guess, would be, like, who do you think Cory Booker is going to be the next person? Because, I mean, that is the person that kind of stands out now, but it always changes, so you never really know who's going to be the next candidate or the next... Yeah.
I think that's, where the problem of any losing presidential party is that you're sort of without a leader and casting about. I'm actually, I don't really, like, I'm fine to see who emerges from the field. I'm fine with there being some organic, natural competition. If 5 or 6 people want to throw their hats in the ring and then we have a good debate, as long as we've got, a good articulate candidate to put up against the Trump administration. What I'm worrying about in terms of the Democratic Party moving forward is just, and I'm sorry to all the Corbynites friends out there who I know you love Jeremy Corbyn, but we can't have a Jeremy Corbyn.
Yeah, I mean, that was another thing that I had in the back of my mind.
Yeah. We can't have a leader like Corbyn who's so divisive within his own party and who basically...
but I don't even know your opinion on Corbyn, so I want to ask you about that. Like, what do you think of Jeremy Corbyn? I didn't even know what you think about him.
Well, I have less of an opinion because I'm not invested in British Labour Party politics. What I see is a collapse. I mean, I know that there are very dedicated people, and some of them are my friends, who really, really love Jeremy Corbyn. And then I know other people who are going to vote Lib Dem for the first time in their life because of Jeremy Corbyn. I actually think Jeremy Corbyn creates an interesting dichotomy because I can see that he's the kind of person that has the policies that I agree with, but I think his leadership doesn't seem to be connecting, and that's kind of a problem. It's a huge problem. Yeah. Because right now
but I don't really agree with that with Bernie, because I think his leadership has worked in the sense that he's very popular. He's doing pretty good. Like, even if you don't like him, he's quite strong in his own right.
Right, but you put him at the head of the Democratic Party, and he's going to start to create, this is it. Bernie's been able to do all the criticism without actually taking any of the responsibility. Corbyn
Corbyn is the leader of Labour, so
yeah, it's a huge difference.
Yeah, right? It's a massive difference. Yeah.
And I think if Bernie was the head of the DNC, there would be massive divisions within the Democratic Party.
Oh yeah, definitely there would be, because it would be kind of like a fight for the. I don't want to be overly dramatic, like a fight for the soul of the Democratic Party or something, whatever, Yeah,
and I think that's what's happening with Labour. You've got the pragmatic wing versus the ideologically, people who want to have certain policy outcomes and are committed to those ideological principles.
Well, but that's why I think it's a failure of leadership, because I think that Corbyn is primed to succeed, but he is struggling so much to do so. I can't help but feel that it's something to do with just his abilities in the role, I suppose. Because when he came in, he was incredibly popular. People were really excited, really jazzed up, and he had such an opportunity to just take it to the Conservatives, just fucking pummel them, and it didn't really materialize. It just didn't happen. So I think it must be something to do with just his ability to lead a party, I suppose.
I agree. And there was he rejected any attempts of sort of doing any kind of coalition, like an anti-Tory coalition, which even if it's improbable or implausible, you could still make, other than an outright dismissal of it, I think. But anyway, even if you don't agree with him on that, Theresa May said that she wasn't going to attend any of the televised leadership debates in this election cycle, and the TV stations were talking about just putting out an empty chair and empty chairing her. And then Corbyn came out and said, well, if Theresa May's not going to go to the debates, neither am I. I was like, you had a chance to speak to the nation without her coming back on you, to take up that time and criticize her in absentia where she can't defend herself on television. You'd have to wait for the news coverage the next day, and you walked away from it.
Yeah.
I don't tactically understand that.
Bad choices, basically.
Yeah.
But I guess that's the thing is, I guess Bernie Sanders has not had the opportunity to be in that kind of position of power for us to critique the way that he's doing what he's doing, And to be honest, at least on the presidential level, neither has Hillary. So it's all kind of conjecture at this point, because what we do have is this orange goblin with small hands, doing what he's doing. So, so it's just a question of who would be the next good person to take this fight up.
Yeah, I think, considering it's day 101 of the Trump administration, as much as I want to think about the next, I think it's just a little too early. We need to let the politics ripen. And that's another thing I've kind of learned over my many years of watching elections happen, is that, there is you can't really predict the future too far in advance in politics simply because events, dear boy, events. And somebody might become a rising star that we hadn't expected because a moment came and he or she took that opportunity.
Man, I'm so sad because when I lived in Japan 2 or 3 years ago, and I was like doing a test run for my YouTube channel. I didn't have a YouTube channel, but I was just like making test videos. And I made a test video where I predicted who would win the presidential election.
Yeah.
Like this is ages ago. And it was on my laptop and I fucking lost it and I cannot remember what I said. But I know for a fact I was completely wrong. And I think I said Jeb Bush won. Because Jeb Bush, Jeb Bush was like by far the person everyone thought was going to win.
Oh yeah, I mean, if you would have looked at
a lot.
Yeah, looking at all previous Republican ideas of like whose turn it was and how the Republican primaries went, I think Jeb Bush would have been everybody's choice.
Yeah.
But he ran just like the worst. He just blew $100 million in the worst way. And we want to talk about incompetent campaigns. His was way worse than Hillary's. Yeah,
I'm really sad that I lost that video because it would be so fun to put that out now. Be like what I said 3 years ago or something.
Yeah,
damn it!
It's not up on a channel anywhere. You didn't upload it where you could.
No, I just lost it. I don't know where it is.
Sad face.
Damn it! It was probably really inept because it would have been like before my first YouTube video. So.
But see, like before he was famous, how Tim used to.
How Tim used to get predictions wrong before he had a YouTube channel. That's fun.
Well, I think a lot of people are going to be sad that we didn't have a big old fight and call each other names, and I didn't kick you out of the hangout.
Well, that's the thing. Like, I feel like people talk so much about the fights between the left and the right all of the time. That's all we see online, but we don't really see many fights between like within the left about where the left should go, except people saying like, I'm a true liberal and come join the new center or some crap. But like, but in terms of like the people on the left, the people to the left of the people pretending that they're the most left, we don't talk a lot about, you know, where should the left go? What should it aim for? Should it be pragmatic and say we're going to compromise on things in order to try to quote unquote win, or are we going to have these stronger values that might seem more pie in the sky, trying to like push things to the left, but it might not be as pragmatic, it might not be as doable, you know?
Yeah,
and that debate, you know, it's happening, but it's definitely obscured by the left versus the right, and by the whole like social justice crap, you know, all that shit.
I think when it comes down to it, we need to connect democratic values to policy prescriptions. And the problem, of course, with Trump, and I don't think it was, I think Bernie would have honestly had the same problem because Trump just sucks up all the oxygen in the room and all the media time. And it would have been the same with Bernie. But we need to be able to connect our policies to people's where they live, right? So there are places like North Carolina and other places where the Black community, voter suppression for certain people in that community, I mean, some people won't care because they don't vote, but for certain people, like having a party, like I was talking on my patron hangout that's going to go up later today about having a federal laws, this idea that, you know, if the states can run their state elections how they want, but we should have uniform laws about how federal elections are conducted. And it should include things like 6 weeks early voting before any federal election, standardized notions of how you become a registered voter and what kinds of information or evidence is necessary to register to vote. And also moving the elections, you know, to a Saturday and a Sunday. So you have 2 days to vote rather than just one short time after work, so that there's not so many problems with long lines and there not being enough ballots. And if we could do that, you know, that's like one thing you could do as a policy that would protect people's rights to vote in communities where they feel under threat. But yeah, we also need the economic issues. You know, we need to be able to already has enough diversity in it where we can have these authentic voices. It's not just a marketing campaign. We have people in the Democratic Party from all of these walks of life. So if we listen to the people in terms of how the party could best represent them and then feed that back as policy solutions to people in those communities and connect that way, that's, I think, the way that we move forward as a party and we win elections.
Well, I mean, this is a ridiculously massive question, but do you think the Democratic Party will win, or the Democratic candidate will win next time? And I know that is predicated on the idea that Donald Trump hasn't nuked Chicago at that point, or done something so ridiculous that it's just automatic that the Democratic candidate will win. Like, putting that aside, like, are you confident that they'll make the right choice, or they'll find a way to appeal to people that in the way they need to?
I can only cross my fingers because there's just so many unknowns. Will Trump be impeached? So are we going to be running against Pence, or will he make it all the way through, and will he, run in 2020? Maybe he's going to decide, you know what? If he thinks he's going to be beat, he might just say,
the
hey,
Pence point, that's
president.
a really good point. If it's not even Trump, that's tricky.
So, and then there's also just people who are already kind of like laying the groundwork who I haven't heard about yet, or aren't on my radar, or, again, it's just so hard to say. I think going forward, the presidency right now, the approval rating that Trump has, it tilts the table in the Democratic candidate's favor, because Trump's not doing well with independents. And the Democratic voters, people who self-identify, are really uniform in their dislike of him. So just like anyone but Hillary, it could be an anyone but Donald in 2020. So it's, go ahead. Your assessment?
No, I was going to say that the only thing that I can conjecture on at this point would be about what kind of choice the Democratic Party makes in terms of who they nominate. That's about it. Because I don't know what's going to be happening on the conservative GOP side. I don't know what's going to be happening with the presidency. I don't know what's going to be the mood or the kind of things that are going on. I just know that the Democrats will have some kind of power about the kind of person they nominate to run. And I think that's the big question, is like, who will be running against either Trump or Pence, or the third person in line to the presidency. I don't know who that is.
Yeah.
And I don't know enough about American civics to know who the third person is, but that person, so that's the big question, is who's it going to be? Because also, I can't think of anything else that I could figure out at this point.
In some ways, it's more important. I mean, it's always good to have the presidency, for sure. But we tend to focus on the presidency, I think, too much, because it's easy to focus on one person and the dynamics of a mano a mano sort of battle. But Congress is where the laws are written. And the Supreme Court is where the decisions are made.
It's better when the president has an opposition House or Senate, because it keeps them in check. They always say that.
Yeah, that's dumb. I would much rather hold one party accountable.
People are like, Clinton was so much better because he had Newt Gingrich.
No, yeah. Well, no, what happened was Clinton was able to negotiate with the Republicans back in the 20th century, and they were able to come up with a compromise position, because compromise was not yet a dirty word in the Republican Party.
Oh, God, even further back, like, damn it, it's Tip O'Neill, isn't it? Tip O'Neill
and Reagan.
I feel like that's like a fucking sainthood kind of. There should be like stained glass windows with those two, because people talk about it like it's a holy time. Like Tip O'Neill and Ronald Reagan, it was like such a romance.
Well, you did get, Ronald Reagan did sign like the that was amnesty, but he did sign a tax increase, and he had to give and take more so than people do today. But I do think that if we focus more on, because Democrats face an uphill battle, right? We're facing gerrymandered seats. We need to win with a lot more votes than Republicans do to get the same number of seats. And the Senate, we're defending more Senate seats than the Republicans. I think we've got 18 up, if that's right, in the next one. So, we are not automatically going to walk into flipping the House and the Senate. We have structural problems. And these structural problems make it even more important that we're not internally divided with petty little squabbles that take our eye off the ball, which is, if we're so busy privilege checking or issue checking other Democrats, we're not focused on the Republicans. And I think we should have the petty squabbles once we're in power. Let's set aside our differences, figure out how we win. And then when we win, how do we internally work out some of these policy value differences? Do we go a little bit farther to the left on healthcare, but we balance it out with some things over here to make sure insurance companies don't go bankrupt and people don't lose their jobs? So that it just ends up being pragmatism.
how do you harness the Bernie energy or the people who are behind Bernie if you have this pro-party stance? How do you harness those people and that energy?
Yeah, I think that's the challenge that the party faces. On the one hand, I think that
Yeah, because you can say to those people like, oh, you are frustrating us and you're being too pure, go away. But you also kind of want their help. You want their energy. You want to take it on board. Like, how do you do that? Unless you don't want it.
Here's the thing. If you're going to ask me to choose between moving farther to the left to appease people who aren't members of the party, to change the party fundamentally and shift it from the center closer to the left, or tell those people, hey, go make your own party. I'm going to go after independent voters who voted for both Democrats and Republicans in the past.
But if it's a lot of people, it's not very pragmatic to just...
But it's a lot of people in certain areas. It's not going to help in certain parts of Wisconsin. It's going to be great in New York City. It's going to be great in California.
But they're going to have long-term grudges. They're going to have a long-term grudge against the Democratic Party. And that's not going to help. It's going to
For what? Not capitulating? I mean, there's some people you're just never going to make happy. And this is the other thing, is that parties are about compromise. You never get everything you want. And if the position of people who are in that is that, if your party isn't what I want, then I'm going to walk away. You're going to have to walk away because you're never going to get everything. It's like the Rolling Stones said, you can't always get what you want. But if you try, sometimes you just might find you get what you need. And if you get enough of what you need to buy in, I think that's where we need to get people to buy in. But some people aren't interested in being Democrats. Some people aren't interested in being members of the party. They have opinions on what the party should be, but they're not interested in actually being in it. And other people are, But I think
I said that in my video. Like, it's the job of the Democratic Party to appeal to voters. It's not the job of voters to say to the Democratic Party, "Do you want us?" Because they can easily just take the ball and go home because they're voters. Like, voters can always leave, right?
Yeah, but parties can always appeal to other voters. It's not just a one-way street. If it's a choice, like I said, between pulling the party to the left or being more moderate and going after independents who have voted for Democratic candidates like Barack Obama in the past and then voted for Trump, it's going to be maybe easier to get those guys to come back in and vote for the candidate than to shift the whole party over to the left for a rather small percentage in places where we don't need to win. We don't need more California Democrats. We don't need more Democrats from New York. We're full up, so we need Democrats from the other places.
But does that mean that Democratic Party has certain voters that they're okay saying to, like, we don't really want your vote, or we don't need your vote, or whatever, and dealing with the consequences of that and saying, like, we don't want or need your vote? Because I feel like they even need to appeal to right-wingers and say, like, hey, this is why you should come over and join us instead of just being with those fucking right-wing fucks over there. You should come over here. It's a lot better.
From a political, if you want to look at it theoretically from political science, the job of parties is to win elections. So the rational thing for a party to do is to go where it thinks it can get the most votes.
Right, but does it matter from whom or just from? Because if it's from anybody, you'd say, like, to people on the right, like, come to the left,
Well, this is it. When you're working in political space, people might vote tactically for a party because they want to keep another party out. They might vote expressively because they actually support that party. They might vote on an issue. And that's it. The party has to be able to try to get that amalgamation of people to vote for it for whatever reason those persons want to vote for the party. And they want to maximize that in order to win elections. So that's the job of the party. The job of the party is to get candidates elected.
But I think the difficult point I'm having here is the idea that you would alienate or specifically say to a certain sect of people, like, we don't really need or want your vote. I don't think, because I feel like you should want the vote from anybody because the vote's a vote. Even, like, if a fucking Nazi votes for you, hopefully they're not voting for you because you're appealing to Nazism, in which case you're a horrible person and fuck you in the first place. But if the dumb, stupid Nazi idiot decides that there's something about the party that I like, I'd be like, yes, give me the vote because I want votes.
So
You know?
what are the necessary and sufficient conditions that the Democratic Party has to do to get every Sanders voter? What would that look like?
You can't get all of them, obviously, but to get the most amount of them, it would just be like, look at Bernie Sanders' policy demands or ideas,
Well, I
and
don't think there's a
then
policy difference. This is it. I don't think it's a policy issue. I think it's a process issue. It seems to me that what people complain about is not policy differences between Clinton and Sanders. They complain
I think a lot of it is like the Wall Street stuff. It's like a lot of it is the finance and that kind of stuff, and at least like giving lip service to all that shit.
So in order to make the Democratic Party more electable, what they have to do is never take any corporate money associated with corporations or rich people.
Oh no, they would have to give a lot of lip service to it and say, "Yes, we're planning on doing that."
But that's it. I mean, what is lip service? I mean, it's just bullshit. I don't think that's going to convince any Sanders people.
Well, that's politics. That's what politics is. It's just like telling people what they want to hear. It's like saying, "We're going to build a wall." Everyone's like, "Great, that sounds good." Oh crap, I'm president.
But if you look at the policies on Glass-Steagall, there are issues on there about strengthening Dodd-Frank in the platform and protecting Glass-Steagall and regulating Wall Street. I mean, those issues are already there. So again, I think it's more of a process issue. It's anger about the caucuses versus the primaries. It's anger about super delegates.
I just had a realization that a lot of it is literally just rhetoric. It's literally just like just the way that you talk about it. It's like, I feel like if the entire Democratic Party woke up tomorrow and decided we're just going to talk about these issues in a similar way to Bernie Sanders, like probably all of those people would just be on board. I'm sorry, I sound very cynical right now.
But that's it. I mean, when I look at that's why I wanted to start out with what kind of vision of America would you be aiming for? Because I don't disagree with Sanders supporters on the issues. But what it feels like to me, what they're really complaining about when they talk about the establishment are process issues, not policy issues. Like the super delegates or the way the caucuses were run.
Well, I mean, like I think it's probably more like rhetoric issues, but the problem is at a certain point the rhetoric runs out and you have to have actions, Yeah. But at least getting into office, you could do all the rhetoric, because I mean, because people say like they want a genuine person who's saying what they want to hear and what they want, and then when they get into office, they get disillusioned with them later. So basically, it's just rhetoric, like talking about taking on Wall Street, the 1%, like all of that kind of stuff.
Or we could be honest with people and say, look, this stuff is hard. You're not going to get everything you want. You can come in and join and help out and get half of what you want, or maybe 3/4, or something better than what we have now. But you can't have everything you want. And you can't have it all your way.
They would be angry later, for sure, when it didn't work out that way. And when the stuff didn't happen, they would be pissed. But I think that's the problem when you care about them. Like Bernie supporters care. They really fucking care a lot. And I'm sure they care in wrong ways, and you've met a bunch of them who care in frustrating and irritating ways. But they do care. And so later, they would be very angry. But if they heard the right rhetoric, because occasionally I've heard like a Democratic politician use some sort of progressive kind of rhetoric, and I'm like, finally, somebody's saying it. Like, just fucking rich, fucking up all the poor people. Bastards, But then when they get into power, they generally don't do what you want them to do.
But if the solution is lie to them, but if the solution is basically, okay, lie to them now and get the votes, and then they'll get angry at you after it's too late. Or
all right, but Obama
be honest with them.
Obama was all like rhetoric, and then when he got in, he was like, changing the system is hard, so I'm probably not going to do that. Like, oh, okay.
Yeah, which is why, like, when the Bernie people are like, no, he's different this time. I'm like, I heard this 8 years ago. But that's it. You can either be honest with people and say you're not going to get what you want, and say then they're going to go be angry and take their balls and go home, or you can lie to them and then they're going to get angry and take their balls and go home. So it seems like you end up with the same situation, which is politicians disappoint people, and you know what? But that's life.
But that's rhetoric too, because people need to understand the realistic things about politics. They need to understand that everything's not going to go exactly how you want to go without it sounding like condescension and then just saying like, you're stupid. You don't know what the hell you're talking about. I've got it. I'll take care of it, even though it won't be what you want. You know, they need to feel like the politician is saying something that appeals to them or that they like. And that, I feel like that is the most paramount thing. It's really important. And I feel like a lot of the time when they say things don't turn out the way you want them to, the only thing people hear is this politician is talking down to me like my beliefs are stupid, and so I don't like them. You know,
Right, but if you look at
I think people think very simply. Sorry.
No, I agree. But I think, we have to realize that the Bernie Sanders segment of the voting population is very small in relation to independent voters and people who only vote in presidential elections, and only pay attention. So the party has to compete across all of those planes.
Oh, but that's the question. Does he represent some sort of wider viewpoint or idea or style of politics?
I guess,
what
really. I would find interesting, because I did see a survey where they asked a bunch of people online if they were getting involved as a consequence of, the Women's March and stuff afterwards. And in this survey, disproportionately, it was women who were like over the age of, 29 to 54 who said, yes, I'm doing stuff. I'm making phone calls. I'm doing, this, I'm going on this march. And so my question is, who in the Democratic base is part of the resistance now? Is it an even split between Bernie supporters and Clinton supporters? Is it disproportionately Clinton supporters because they're more base and they're getting involved with the party is a natural thing? So I would actually I think the future of the party will depend a little bit on the kinds of people taking part in activism around the country right now. And I don't have a good sense of where those people fall in terms of who they supported in the primaries.
All right.
Because that's where the energy is.
I feel like this has been a good discussion. Everybody got wrecked. That's what we like. I think.
Owned.
I don't know.
Owned.
Yeah, everybody is owned. And then I'll be looking forward to the massive quote mining of this conversation, I guess.
Oh, yeah, certainly.
That's probably
I
on
look
the
forward
way.
to that. I will, when I put up the video, I'll put skip ahead to minute 23 if you want to avoid discussions about what a dick bearing is.
Yeah, and avoid this particular moment as well.
Exactly. Oh,
but I think that's But I think that's the thing is like, when I have a disagreement with somebody that I respect, I want to talk to them about the disagreement. But if I have a disagreement with somebody that I think is a pile of crap, I don't care about talking to them about that. And because they're a shitty person,
And what I found and what you found too, I'm sure we both suspected, is that when it comes to the actual values, we agree. What we're disagreeing on is the paths to get there and the ways to be most successful and inclusive, and also realistic. And that's where, you can have reasonable disagreements without it being ginned up into, fake drama that gets other people clickbait views.
Well, and also, like I said, at the start, it just came up because of that Unity tour, but I'm sure these questions are going to come up more about what is the Democratic Party about. I'm sure it's going to come up a lot, and people are going to be talking about that. And then it's like, what are the answers to that? I'm not really fully sure, but it's something that I'm interested in. It's a very interesting subject. And
more so than the Republican Party, that question has to cover people with a lot more diversity. We have to be...
oh God, yeah. Of course. I mean, it's
so it's much harder. Question. We can't just put together a fundamentalist Christian white male package and go, hey, we're done.
Only thing. Exactly.
We have to cover everyone. So anyway, yes.
I understood exactly what you meant. I was like, yes. Fucking Republican Party is just white men. That's the only thing. Sorry.
And although the people who agree with that agenda.
I've been too harsh on white people during this hangout, but I have no regrets. Because I'm allowed to say it because I'm a white cis male. White cis males. I mean, I'm a white cis male. I'm allowed to say whatever I want about them. Yes. That's how it works.
Hey, Tim, check your, let me get my checklist off privilege. And you're male privilege. You're white privilege. You're
Oh, God. I've got too much to check.
All right, so I think we should probably bring this to a close, but it's been a great conversation. Don't go anywhere when I sign off, because I'll talk to you a little bit off air before you head off for your day. But yeah, this was a good discussion, and I'm glad we were able to do it. It's probably best to have done it outside of the context of the campaign itself, and also when we both have our eyes focused on our common political opponent, which is Trump and the Republicans, because that's a source of, there's nothing that brings people together than bonding over people they hate. That's what it's I feel closer to you now, and of course all of that was water under the bridge anyway, but yes, just this was a lovely chat, and we should do it again as things progress, as we get closer to 2018, as people start popping up as possible nominees. It would be good for us to see where we both end up as the next election cycle goes on.
Yeah, definitely.
All right, go check out Tim's channel if you haven't subscribed. So go sub. What's wrong with you? And thanks again, Tim, for having this chat with me. Everybody?
Yeah, you too.
Okay. I've been Kristi, guys. You've been awesome. Tim's been awesome. And I will see you again really soon. Bye-bye from both of us.
Well, I mean, it's basically like I made a video recently talking about Bernie Sanders and what I called the Democratic establishment, etc. And I find that like it's very hard to make legitimate criticisms of other people who are kind of like in a similar realm to you when you're in this kind of like pitched battle with, I don't know, in our case it's like anti-SJWs or whatever, because they're trying to find divisions. So we're saying things like the left is eating itself, like, well, they're destroying each other, or like, oh, it's so brutal, when a lot of the time it's just like you've got a difference of opinion. It's not like something really, impossible to get past or anything. But, I've definitely found that it's really hard to make legitimate criticisms of people on my quote unquote side now, because I'm so concerned that anything I say will just be twisted beyond recognition. And in your case, it was kind of used to create this kind of smear campaign that I was not behind at all, that I was not interested in, that I did not know my video and my ideas will be used for that kind of thing. And so, I've had a strong disagreement with you about the whole like Hillary versus Bernie thing, and that was going on like during the election. And that hasn't really come up since the election, I guess. But it definitely makes it really hard for me to have kind of like a criticism of you, because I'm just thinking about how people are going to use that shit. Yeah, and it's fucking frustrating, really, because it's like there are definitely things that I want to criticize people on quote unquote my side about, but I feel like I can't kind of do that because fuck knows what they're going to make out of it. Like the people who are trying to like make divisions, Yeah, so at least that was my feeling about it,
Yeah, and again, I'm kind of going over some old ground. Yeah, I mean, let's just say what happened. Yeah, you have a very strong anti-doxing stance. And I agree in part. I think your stance is more extreme than mine is. For instance, I know Michael in a recent hangout said, a newspaper shouldn't have doxed a guy who made statements in public. I'm like, it's a newspaper. It's not like the internet. These people are reporting. I think that's different. But we can have those differences of opinion. But Bering took what was you trying to express yourself and manipulated it. He claimed to have evidence that you said something in a conversation which you never said, and basically used it as a way to create a lie about what you had communicated, and that lie got out there, and no matter how many times you've told him he's lying about what you said and that he chopped up your video, he refuses to accept responsibility and retract it. So obviously then there was that massive long hangout with Kraut and T and Jeff Holiday and other people, and the theme they kept coming back to is, why don't the people on the other side criticize each other? Why don't the feminists criticize each other? Why don't the feminists criticize each other? Well, and then you do a video where it's you're talking about Bernie and the establishment, and you mention our disagreement, and immediately Bering is in there like, oh, there's Tim and Kristi and he's going after her and destroying her. Yeah, it's precisely this. Like, if you take everything, any slight amount of disagreement, and and Bering, for instance, or someone else blows it up into this person hates this person, and you feel like your words are being misrepresented, you will then say less in the future because you don't want to be misrepresented. So it's just a double bind. Like they're saying, oh, you should criticize each other more. But when you criticize each other more, we're going to misrepresent you and try to create divisions where there are none.
Well, that's the problem is I don't know what the criticism is going to be used for. Like, so if I criticize you or Michael or somebody else, I don't know what the fuck they're going to use that for. Like, what they're going to start churning out videos where they're like, oh, look, Tim is the good one. Tim is the guy who is taking it to Kristi by saying this and that about her. And then I have to keep trying to correct them and say that that's not really what my criticism was about. You know, my criticism was about this and that. And they won't listen to what my criticism is about. You know, they didn't listen to what my original criticism was about. Like I said, I don't want it to go down the road of doxing. And they literally came to me and said, you said they were going down the road to doxing. And I was like, no. And I was like, no, I didn't say that. No, I said, I didn't want them to in the future, you know, so it was kind of like a future thing. Like, you know, because this information about Bering was out in the public and you guys had noticed it, I didn't want people to like start thinking that was a good thing to hold on to like, oh, I'm going to go seek out this information, which is already out there and like find it and stuff. And I expressed like worry that in the future, you know, you and Danny could get into stuff like that. And they turned that into you did it and you were the masterminds and shit. And I'm just thinking like, I cannot criticize people on my quote unquote side because I don't know what they're going to do with it. I don't know what they're going to turn it into. And then I had to spend months and months trying to tell people that that's not what I was saying. And then they're just like, oh, look, he's backtracking now. I'm like, I'm not backtracking. Yes. I'm trying to say what I originally said.
Yeah. You know? And on that, you know, I mean, you and I I've never blamed you. Like, for instance, if I was actually guilty of that, I would have been upset with you for throwing me under the bus. But I never gave any information. I didn't have any information to give ED, let alone give it over. And so I knew you were being misrepresented, which is why it's never gotten in the way of our friendship. And it's why you still are, you know, anti-doxing and my friend, because you know that I wasn't out there collecting basically the kind of information Bering sent me in an email I've never had, but he has mine, you know, that kind of situation. And also, let's just point out the hypocrisy. People here who said, you know, because I visited a website that somehow, or I linked to prove that Bering was lying about his reason for threatening Danny to dox Danny, showing that, no, he wasn't doxed by Danny's friend, and that's not a legitimate reason to threaten to dox Danny. These are the same people who are saying Sargon, when he went and took information from a guy's OkCupid profile, and put it up on his website and in a video that was seen by over 300,000 people, or his university page with his physical location, his room number. Somehow that wasn't doxing.
Yeah.
But, you know, putting a link to prove Bering was lying, that somehow is. And just the double standards, too, as to basically if anyone on their side puts up information, it's fine. And if we, you know, even use it to counter a lie that's being spread by somebody as evidence of that lie, then that's somehow wrong. So it's just really hypocritical, and it really poisons the conversation.
Yeah, because Sargon also recently put up like all of this information about this guy who 4chan decided or did investigative work that he was the guy who hit the person over the head with the bike lock or whatever. And that is not confirmed. And even if it was confirmed, I don't believe in like vigilante justice. What are they going to do? Are they going to go like kill the guy? Like, why are you putting all this information out there? Shouldn't that be reported to the authorities and they can investigate whether he was the guy who hit the person with the bike lock? Like, why are you telling thousands of people who he is? What are you trying to achieve? Like, so someone can go to his workplace and like kill him or something? Like, you know, that's vigilante justice. It's street justice. Like, that's not something I believe in. If Sargon was actually really concerned about this guy, he would report it to the authorities. Like, say, like, hey, I've got it on good authority that this guy did something. But instead, it's like, hey, thousands of people, here's some information. Go crazy. Like, what? Why?
And I'm going to monetize this video. Yeah, well, and I'm going to monetize this video. I think the answer is right there. Yeah, so just the double standards. Like, if they were actually consistent on what the standards of doxing were, but it clearly just adjusts based on who is who is the person putting the information out there and who is the subject of the information.
Well, I think we disagreed on the newspaper too about millennial woes. I was actually against that because I was like, no matter how bad Millennial Woes is, I don't know if he's like committed a crime or something. Like he's a horrible person who says really bad things. But do we want to just give his information to random civilians so they can go over to his house and like try to kill him with a sledgehammer? Like, wouldn't you tell the authorities? Like, be like, this guy is really like he's spreading a hateful message. He's real dodgy. Like, you should keep an eye on him. That's the way it should be done. Like, you should tell the people whose job it is to watch him. You shouldn't just tell rant because you don't even know who you're telling. Like the newspaper didn't know who they were talking to. They could have easily have gone over to try and kill Millennial Woes and like, but hurt somebody else, or like tried to blow up his house, but blown up somebody else's house. Like who knows?
Well, then you could also apply that to Roosh V. That Roosh V should have never been covered by the newspapers. And you know, at some point, you're making public statements.
Oh no, it's not. Not covering. It's showing where he lives. They should definitely not do that, in my opinion. Like because you don't know who's going to do something with that information. They could, like, total psychopathic people could do something with that information. You know,
yeah, I guess, you know, newspapers just have a different, when they come to covering, reporting, and taking pictures of people, you know, if they're outside, they're kind of fair game. And I don't think newspapers kind of hold themselves to the internet doxing standards, because their standards go all the way back to before there was the internet. And they were, you know, they show celebrities outside of their house all the time. So I don't think it really occurs to them in that way, the way that it has become an issue on, you know, the internet sort of used to have its own code about online, offline, but newspapers don't have that, I don't think. You know,
well, I do think it does kind of depend, I think, on the tone. Like if you're saying this is a dangerous person and you're telling the whole world this person's dangerous, by the way, they live here. But if you're just saying like, oh, this is a lovable celebrity who everybody loves, like it's not such a big deal because it's kind of like, it's not like a negative message.
Well, it is if that person is like, you know, the guy who's obsessing on Jodie Foster. You know, if you put out a celebrity's house, you never know who's going to get, you know, that you can extend that to anybody because people can be weird. But anyway, we're getting way off topic. So after that little rant, all these people who are tuning in for a good Bernie Sanders chat are hearing us bitch about Bering again, and screw that. Let's.
Oh, sorry, but just the final thing is on my Ask FM, somebody said that you were like obsessed with the Bering, and then I responded to that by saying that I think you should like diversify your content or something, like that maybe you talk about him too much. But I literally sort of just meant that in the way that like he's kind of a sinkhole of time. Like if you keep responding to him, it sort of goes on forever, you know? And I've definitely been aware of that myself, because I've been like, I could spend all of my content just trying to respond to this fucking douche who is constantly smearing me and coming out with all this shit. I know it's a bit different with you because of the whole doxing thing, but that's sort of the angle I was approaching it from. And you said to me like that was kind of justifying their language of like obsessed. And I definitely see your criticism. I didn't really pay attention to the fact they put it that way. I was just thinking more like, yeah, you know, he's kind of a sinkhole. You're like, it's like you can spend your entire life talking about this dude because he's just going to keep putting you in videos and keep being a total douche. And it's going to, I don't know, fuck up like you being able to make videos about other things. That's like all I was trying to say.
Yeah, and just really quickly on that language. Yeah, this is, I mean, all of the videos that call me obsessed, right? Because I am defending my innocence, because I'm making videos that, one, I mean, I make some entertaining videos criticizing Bering's crappy content because it's easy, because it's crap. And that's entirely fair criticism. But to stand up and defend my innocence against what are false allegations, completely false allegations, somehow, you know, by calling me obsessed, it's basically trying to put me in the Glenn Close bunny boiler category, right? So what they say is Bering, Kristi, can make up lies about you and put those lies on his channel and spread them. But if you try to if you try to respond to them, if you try to get him to retract his comments, then you're the problem. So what you really need to do is shut up and accept the lies that he's spreading about you, because if you don't, then you're the weirdo, not the person who is spending time drawing pictures of you and making up has a nickname for you and puts you in videos that are just, you know, have nothing to do with you. He's not obsessed. You're the one obsessed for trying to.
Well, you know what? I mean, that's actually interesting, because like they call you obsessed and stuff, but I'm not even that involved in the whole kind of doxing drama crap. But when I watch his videos, people randomly put me in them for like no reason. I'm just like watching this video and all of a sudden I'm in it. And he's just like, and people are like, oh, you know, I love you in Bering's videos because you're kind of like a meme, because he just takes little snippets of you and turns you into a meme, and you just say like fucking cunt in the video, and they're like, oh, it's hilarious. But I've literally been kind of like dehumanized because they don't even really know who I am. They're just like, oh, Tim is the guy in Bering videos who says fucking cunt or something. And I feel like that is Bering's way of kind of detaching you from your, I guess, humanity, so that you're not like a person really. You're just like a joke or something. I guess it's why he always calls you that weird name and like gives you this stupid cartoon picture, because it's just his way of like dehumanizing you. So he's not responding to a person, he's responding to like this cartoon character. And I'm not a person who he has issues with. I'm just like some random meme guy who says, oh, fuck you, cunt, in his videos. You know, I feel like it's a tactic. You just cut people out and you turn them into these like little tropes. You know what I mean?
Oh yeah, I mean, all his content is just garbage. It's just fluff with tropes and predictable joke setups and formulaic, and he just craps them out 5 per week so that he can cash in. Yeah, he's not interested in intelligence or even representing the humanity of people. He's interested in clearly like using you and using basically setting things up where you can be a foil to him, where he looks good, or he puts in Kevin so he can tell him to shut up. You know, he kind of creates a little safe space where he can control everything and look like the good guy and the victim. And so Bering needs a safe space more than any of the SJWs he complains about.
Well, today someone said to me, like, I only know you from Bering and it's not good, but I thought I'd give you a chance anyways. And it's sort of like, that's kind of like what he's like set up. He set it up so that the people who disagree with him, like there's something abhorrent or wrong about them, I guess. They're not really like human. They're just these little characters that he's created. Yeah. And so I'm always being responded to by Bering fans who are like, oh, you're that character from the Bering show. It's like, yeah, I guess, because that's just that, like, he does that instead of actually thinking about people's arguments. Anyways.
Yes, as we were saying, Bering is a big time suck. Yes, I will put a timestamp going. If you want to avoid all of the Bering content, just go to this timestamp.